The night had settled into a thick, creeping darkness as Tammy Harper steered her old sedan along the lonely stretches of northern California's Highway 109. The kind of night that makes every shadow stretch longer, every sound sharper, and every movement seem like a threat. The road ahead was shrouded in fog, dense and gray, curling around the trees like spectral fingers. Tammy's headlights barely cut through it, casting a weak circle of illumination that seemed to vanish as soon as it touched the black asphalt. Her phone had no signal, and the GPS had frozen hours ago. She was completely alone, miles from the nearest town, with nothing but the cold wind and the rhythmic hum of the engine for company. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as she drove, heart thudding against her ribs. The kind of night that makes you imagine things that aren't there. Every twist in the road brought shadows that looked like figures, standing just at the edge of her vision. At first, she told herself it was just her imagination, the kind of paranoia that comes when you're tired, alone, and driving into the unknown. But the shadows were persistent, flickering in the fog, moving just as she tried to focus on them. A sudden shape on the roadside made her slam on the brakes, a woman, old, frail, standing completely still by the edge of the road. Her clothes were tattered, gray, blending with the fog, and she raised one hand as if beckoning Tammy to stop. Tammy's breath caught. She shifted into park, squinting through the fog. When she blinked, the woman had vanished. No footsteps, no rustling leaves, just gone. As if she had never been there at all. Tammy's stomach twisted with unease, a cold pit forming deep in her gut. She tried to shake it off. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe the fog was playing tricks. But then the lights appeared. At first, it was just a glimmer, low and flickering, dancing on the edges of the trees. They seemed to grow closer, then further away, almost as if they were moving with her, taunting her. Tammy slowed the car, eyes darting, pulse hammering. There was something unnatural about them. No regular vehicle, no headlights, just a pale, wavering glow in the mist. Her hands tightened on the wheel as an uneasy feeling crawled up her spine. She tried to turn her radio on, hoping the static noise might ground her in normality, but instead it buzzed violently before cutting out. Then, faintly, she heard it, a whispering sound, almost like someone exhaling through dry lips. It came from the back seat, or at least it sounded like it. She whipped her head around. Nothing. The fog pressed against the windows like fingers. A sudden sign emerged from the mist, Red Maple Inn. The paint was faded, the letters chipped, the building's outline barely visible through the haze. Tammy hesitated. It looked abandoned, like something that had been forgotten by time. But the lights inside flickered, warm against the cold blue fog. She needed a break from the endless road, a chance to collect her thoughts. Her nerves were frayed. Maybe it was just a motel, a harmless place to rest for an hour. She pulled into the parking lot, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, echoing into the thick silence of the night. The front door of the inn groaned as she pushed it open, and a musty, stale smell hit her instantly. Dust hung in the air like a thin gray curtain. The lobby's dim lights barely illuminated the worn carpet, peeling wallpaper, and the old wooden reception desk. Behind it sat a man, old, hunched, pale-skinned, his eyes unnervingly steady, focused straight on her. "You're late," he said, voice low and almost rasping. "But this road, it ends here." Tammy blinked, taken aback. She smiled nervously. "I just lost the road," she said, forcing lightness into her voice. He said nothing, only pushed a small brass key across the counter toward her. The key felt cold in her hand, heavier than it should have been, and the metal seemed to absorb the dim light around it. She carried it down the narrow hallway toward her room. Each step echoed against the walls in a way that seemed unnatural, as if the hallways were listening. The room smelled faintly of mildew and something metallic. She turned the key, and the door opened with a loud click, revealing a room that seemed ordinary at first. But then she noticed the details. The floorboards warped as if breathing. The wallpaper patterned in dark, twisting lines that didn't make sense, and a faint, sticky wetness on the carpet. She stepped inside, and the door slammed behind her without warning. The echo of it rang like a gunshot in the small room. Tammy froze, staring at the walls. Something was moving, or was it just her imagination? Shadows shifted in corners, sometimes merging, sometimes separating, almost like they had a mind of their own. The air had grown thick, heavy, every breath a struggle, and somewhere in the silence, she heard a faint whisper again. Her name, Tammy. The first sight of the shadow made her heart stop. It stood at the far end of the room, dark and undefined, like smoke twisted into a human shape. Its form flickered between clarity and haze, and its movements were jerky, unnatural. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't move. She felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by fear. The room seemed to shrink, the walls leaning closer with each passing second. Her eyes darted to the corners, to the ceiling, to the floor. Every shadow seemed alive, breathing with a malevolent patience, waiting. The faint buzz of the radio, though she hadn't turned it on, crept through the room, like static laced with whispers. "It's not over." Tammy's breath came in ragged gasps. She fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at her throat. The shadow stretched closer, dissolving into the corner of the room, then surging forward in sudden motion. She flinched, throwing herself backward against the wall. The whispering grew louder, overlapping, a chorus of voices she couldn't separate, each one calling her name, taunting her, dragging her deeper into terror. Somewhere far off, a door creaked open, though she hadn't touched it. A faint light spilled into the room, revealing a trail of wet footprints that hadn't been there moments ago. The shadow froze at the trail's start, then melted into the mist again, leaving only that suffocating, watching presence behind. Tammy sank to the floor, wrapping her arms around her knees, trying to convince herself she was imagining it. But the air was thick, damp with the scent of iron and decay. Every sound, the hum of the heater, the distant drip of water, even her own heartbeat felt amplified, menacing. She pressed herself against the wall, eyes wide, staring at the door, wishing for dawn, wishing for escape. Minutes passed or hours. She couldn't tell, and the whispering finally subsided into an oppressive silence. She dared a glance around. The room looked the same, yet somehow changed. The wallpaper lines twisted into patterns she hadn't seen before. Shapes that looked like faces pressed against the walls. Shadows lingered in corners, refusing to fade, watching. The key in her hand felt heavier than before, pulsing almost like it had a heartbeat. Somewhere deep inside, Tammy knew this was only the beginning. The highway outside, the fog, the shadows, they were all connected to this place. And the Red Maple Inn had just begun to reveal its hunger. Outside, the highway lay in silence, waiting, shrouded in fog, ready to swallow the next traveler who dared to drive its lonely, cursed path. Tammy's eyes darted around the room, her pulse hammering in her ears as if it were a drum calling attention to every unseen terror. The shadow that had frozen in the corner of the room moments ago had vanished, or at least she hoped it had. The silence felt heavier now, thick and suffocating, as though the very air had weight, pressing down on her chest and making each breath a labor. The key in her hand was still cold, unnervingly so, and she couldn't shake the feeling that it pulsed in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She forced herself to stand, her legs trembling, and took a tentative step toward the door. It remained locked, stubbornly, mocking her attempts to escape. Tammy's gaze swept the room again. The warped floorboards, the sticky damp carpet, the wallpaper twisting into unrecognizable patterns. Shadows clung to every corner, forming shapes her mind could not comprehend. Some seemed almost human, others like twisted imitations of people she might have seen before. Faces contorted in silent screams. The radio crackled violently, and then, faintly, a whisper seeped through the static. "You shouldn't be here." Tammy froze, staring at the device. Her fingers itched to throw it across the room, but the whisper continued, growing louder, overlapping until it became a chorus of voices calling her name, mocking her. "Tammy, Tammy." Tammy, the room seemed to pulse with the sound vibrating through the floor, the walls, and her very bones. She backed away, bumping into the wall. Her mind raced for explanations, for something rational, but logic had no foothold here. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee, but the door wouldn't budge. The walls themselves seemed to close in slightly, and the temperature dropped further, frost forming along the edges of the windows. Tammy could see her breath curling in the cold air, each exhale trembling. A low, dragging sound emerged from the hallway. It was slow, deliberate, metallic. Tammy's stomach knotted. She couldn't see the source, only that the sound was getting closer, echoing in the small room, reverberating against the warped walls. Her heart raced uncontrollably as she pressed herself to the wall, holding her breath. Then, a flicker of movement caught her eye. The shadow appeared again, more defined this time. It didn't walk like a human, but glided door perhaps slid across the floor. Its head tilted unnaturally, jerking side to side, and she realized with growing horror that it was studying her. Tammy's mind screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Each corner she looked toward seemed alive, flickering and bending in ways that defied reality. The key in her hand grew colder, heavier, as though it had absorbed some fragment of the shadow's malevolence. She felt a strange compulsion, a pull toward the far end of the room, toward the shadow itself. Every fiber of her being resisted, but something unexplainable urged her forward. She stumbled, moving toward it, each step weighted, echoing on the warped floorboards like thunder. The whispering grew louder, filling the room, the hallways, the very air. "It wants you. It will take you. You belong here." Tammy's stomach turned. Her mind screamed that it was impossible, that this was a hallucination, but the evidence of her senses denied her. The wallpaper twisted again, forming faces that seemed to scream in silent agony, their eyes following her every movement. Suddenly, the floor beneath her shivered, a subtle but undeniable quiver, as though the building itself were alive. The walls groaned and twisted outward, revealing shapes in the shadows that had been invisible before. Figures moved just at the edge of her vision, too quick, too fluid, slipping in and out of perception like water through fingers. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale shaky, loud, revealing her presence to whatever was watching. Tammy turned to the door, desperate, and the brass key pulsed in her hand like it had a heartbeat of its own. Something about it felt wrong, ancient, powerful, and dark. A sense of inevitability gripped her, the knowledge that whatever haunted this place had been waiting for her arrival. And now there was no escape. The dragging sound grew closer, more deliberate, resonant. Footsteps. No, these were not human. They were heavy, slow, deliberate, and they pressed into her mind as well as the room. She squeezed her eyes shut, hoping the sound would vanish, but it didn't. It circled the room now, a predator toying with its prey. Her gaze flicked to the far wall. The shadow had expanded, coalescing into a vague but terrifying form. Its body was smoky and amorphous, constantly shifting. but its face or something that might have been a face was horrifyingly human-like, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare directly into her soul. She felt paralyzed, unable to move, unable to scream. Then, suddenly, the whispering stopped. Silence, a silence so complete it was deafening. Tammy's ears strained for any sound, her chest heaving, and in that silence, she realized something worse. The shadow was no longer at the far end of the room. It was behind her. She spun around. Nothing. Just the dim light of the flickering bulb above, but the air felt thicker there, heavier, as if some invisible force pressed against her back. The key in her hand burned cold again, pulsing like it had absorbed the presence of the shadow. Tammy's knees buckled, and she fell to the floor, curling up as the fear consumed her entirely. A sudden, violent crack split the silence. The ceiling above shuddered, and the walls groaned, revealing cracks that ran like spiderwebs across the room. From somewhere, a low, guttural noise emerged, resonating from beneath the floorboards. It was a sound of hunger, of waiting, of something ancient and cruel. Tammy screamed, the sound raw and ragged, bouncing off the walls, echoing into the empty corridors beyond. The shadow surged forward in a sudden, impossible movement, spreading like black smoke, filling the room with its presence. Tammy tried to crawl away, but the air itself seemed to resist her. Every step she took felt heavier, slower, as if she were moving through water. The shadow swirled around her, whispering her name, tugging at her very essence. Hours or minutes passed. Tammy could not tell. Time had no meaning here. The inn, the highway outside, the fog, and the shadows, they were all part of a single, malevolent entity, and Tammy was trapped in the heart of it. When morning finally began to leak through the thin curtains, it was not a relief. The room appeared unchanged, yet she felt different, diminished. The shadow had receded, but its presence lingered, as though it had claimed a part of her. Tammy staggered to the window, peering out at the highway, shrouded in fog, silent and empty. Her car sat where she had parked it, untouched, but she felt an icy certainty that leaving would not be as simple as opening the door. The police arrived hours later, responding to a concerned call from her friend who had not heard from her. They found the Red Maple Inn deserted, empty of guests. The hallways silent except for the faint hum of electricity. Tammy was gone. Her car remained, keys inside, and her bag still in the room, but there was no trace of her. The radio, which had pulsed with whispers the night before, sat dead and silent. Yet those who have traveled Highway 109 at night say you can sometimes hear her screams. Faint, desperate, carried by the fog that coils along the trees. They say if you slow down, stop, and watch closely, you might see shadows moving just at the edge of the road, flickering, almost human, and the Red Maple Inn waits, patient, hungering, for the next traveler to make a wrong turn, to drive too far into the night, where the highway swallows them whole. Highway 109 remains desolate, shrouded in mist, with an air of expectation, as if the road itself remembers each lost soul. And those who dare venture there are never quite the same, carrying the weight of unseen eyes and whispered warnings that follow them long after they leave. Tammy Harper's story is not unique. It is a warning, whispered through the wind, hidden in the fog, waiting for anyone who thinks they can brave the lonely highway. Because once the highway has marked you, once it has whispered your name, there is no going back.
Please like and subscribe channel Fear Frequency for more horror stories. Thank you.